Thank you, Toby. Now it's time for another set of showcase sessions. Similar to yesterday's sessions, these will feature 3 short 10-minute presentations which show off innovative projects, technologies and strategies. The sessions are pre-recorded, but if we're lucky, the speakers may be lurking around in the live chat function, so please go and ask them any questions as we go. So first up, talking about the practicalities of utility scale PV, risks and opportunities, is Joe Wall, Strategic Director for Climate Response, as our headline sponsor, Local Partnerships.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jo Wall, the Strategic Director for Climate Response at Local Partnerships. Local Partnerships is an organisation owned by the Local Government Association, the Treasury and the Welsh Government. We provide improvement support into the public sector. We're here today to talk to you about renewable energy. Prior to being with Local Partnerships, I have worked as a successful solar developer in the UK. I've developed around 400 megawatts of solar PV in the UK across 65 sites, including some of the very first sites in the UK. I've won national awards for my schemes on 3 different occasions, including most recently the 9 megawatt site at Lambie Way in Cardiff, which is a Cardiff City Council project with a private wire connection to the local wastewater treatment plant. In the last year, I've also been one of the lead authors for the Local Government Association on their Good Practice Guide for Renewable Energy, together with my colleague Nathan Wicks, who's a former wind developer. In terms of the rationale for local authority renewables projects, we're operating in a complex climate. We're working on green economic recovery following the COVID-19 lockdown, and many of you will have made climate emergency declarations. However, all of this comes against a backdrop of austerity and reduced revenues in recent years and the increased financial pressures as a consequence of COVID-19. But you do have some interesting advantages in this market over other people who might actually buy or own these assets. And these are principally because you're large consumers of electricity, and most private sector plant will only actually proceed if they have a buyer lined up for the electricity. And you're actually in a unique position in that you're able to purchase the electricity from your own schemes yourselves. The other is around the cost of borrowing and the fact that you have a uniform and relatively low cost of borrowing, either through Public Works Loan Board or through the development of a municipal bond, whereas a private sector investor would have its borrowing sliced and diced throughout the project and much more expensive rates of finance at different points in the project. So, for example, their development finance or their construction finance might be at around 15%, whereas your cost of borrowing across the project is uniform and is probably closer to 2.5%. So you do have the potential for some competitive advantage if you're actually looking to buy schemes as well as to develop them. What I would like to talk to you about today, however, is some of the things that can go wrong. I've been relatively frustrated on occasions since coming into this sector at the quality of advice I sometimes see provided by advisors to local authorities and other public bodies in relation to solar PV development. I've seen, for example, advice that we could cross a railway line. In my experience, that's an extremely difficult thing to achieve, and I've seen reports just suggesting that it can be done very easily. You can't drill underneath railway lines. You either have to find a connection in a local road bridge or you have to put in additional overhead cable, both of which are really problematic. I've seen suggestions that small schemes could connect to large infrastructure, 132 kV and above. And again, the economics of that make that impossible for schemes under about 30 or 40 megawatts. And I've seen irradiance data for solar reports used from sites which are 30 miles from the location. There's no need for that. There's actually publicly available free data on the PVGIS Europa databases, which is really accurate and very postcode specific. So what I would say is when you're choosing advisors to help you, be very careful about who you choose, because actually just because people have produced lots of nice thick reports with lots of pretty pictures and diagrams in doesn't actually necessarily mean that they've got a lot of actual delivery experience on the ground in terms of bringing projects over the line. I see also, and more worryingly indeed, overestimation of benefits in a lot of business cases. And that comes in 2 forms. The first is in terms of the inflation assumptions. Because all your costs are in year 1 and your benefits flow in subsequent years, then overestimating the inflation benefits on those revenues inflates them over time to a disproportionate extent. So I've recently seen a report with a 5% inflation rate in it. I would suggest that using the government target inflation rate of 2% is probably a more appropriate starting point. But also in terms of the energy price forecast information that sits underneath those. So some business cases just take a fixed point in time and say maybe 5 pence per kilowatt hour for a wholesale price. Others might use the BEIS forecasts. We work with Aurora Energy Research. Aurora are one of the leading providers of energy price forecast information in the UK. And any business cases that we provide would always use their data as well as comparators such as the BEIS data. I think it's really important to understand the long-term future for pricing in terms of wholesale electricity if you're getting into schemes, particularly if your schemes are for financial gain. As we see more renewables developed and deployed across the UK, something like 4 times the amount we've got now if we're going to achieve our 2050 target, then we reach a point where we start to see price cannibalisation, which can have some quite dramatic impacts on business cases. I also see very poor information on costs and construction costs. So typically, private sector organisations don't work with the quantity surveying and cost consultancy practices that would support public sector organisations. And there is very clear differential pricing between the two. But also there are decisions around make or buy that need to be thought through very carefully around whether it's worth actually developing on your own assets if you've got suitable land assets, or whether actually it's worth looking for schemes to buy in the marketplace, either at shovel ready to build or indeed actually connected and already constructed. I'm also going to talk to you today a little bit about the truth about benefits. So the reasons that you might invest in renewable energy, and we're certainly seeing a lot of organisations that are looking to do that, are twofold. They're generally either for carbon savings or they're for cash generation. In terms of carbon savings, the graph in front of you is the BEIS electricity conversion factors. So this represents the amount of carbon in every kilowatt hour of electricity produced. Back in 2010, it was considerably higher than it is today. It's almost halved, which many of you will have seen in your own carbon reduction plans that actually you've made really good progress. And quite often that progress has been because of the wider decarbonisation in the power sector, and therefore the carbon intensity of the electricity you're buying is just lower. Going forward, those benefits will change. And they'll reduce, which means that you will rely much more on cash benefits going forward. Now, cash benefits, I've already touched on the importance of understanding what the market might look like in terms of what forecast revenues might be. But I think it's also important that you assess alternatives, you understand whether you might be better off using your own PPA, so power purchase agreement, and having a third-party provider. Or if you are looking to develop a project, what project returns look like, but also if you're looking to purchase a project, actually understanding the competitive position of those that might bid against you and what private sector returns look like. As it's not fair to assume that you're just going to be able to swan in and purchase a project. You'd have to be competitive, and you would need to understand not only what that means for your returns, but also the price at which others might be able to bid. And finally, if you are looking to either develop a scheme or buy a scheme at shovel ready, there is a real challenge in public procurement. So I've seen prices in the private sector this summer for build at about £450,000 a megawatt, excluding grid. The best public sector pricing I've seen on any site at all, and it was a large site, was at about £575,000 per megawatt. So there's a considerable premium for public procurement. And again, understanding whether you buy a project that's already built or one that's actually shovel ready is important in that context. As you can see, it's a complex set of considerations, and we haven't got time today to actually discuss them with you in detail. But if there's anything I've said today which is of interest and you'd like some more information, then please feel free to contact either myself, Jo Wall, the Strategic Director for Climate Response at Local Partnerships, or my colleague Nathan Wicks. Thank you.